welcome to your personalized deep dive. You shared some excerpts from Nassim Taleb's The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable.
Oh, a fantastic book.
And you mentioned that you're really keen on figuring out how to navigate a world that seems to throw, well, curveballs our way.
More often than we'd like, that's for sure.
Right. So we're going to unpack Taleb's ideas on those unpredictable events, the ones with huge impact, those black swans, and how our brains crave narratives even when they might
Mislead us.
yeah, exactly. And then we'll get into some strategies for not just surviving, but thriving in all this uncertainty.
Sounds like a plan. You know, it's interesting. When The Black Swan was published, it really challenged so many of the conventional ways we think about risk and prediction.
It definitely got people talking. One of the first things that struck me was how Taleb defines these black swans. They're not just unpredictable, they have this massive impact.
And it's only after they happen that we scramble to explain them away.
Right. It's like we're trying to fit them into our existing worldview, make them seem less random.
More predictable than they really were. It's like imposing order on chaos.
Exactly. He uses examples like the incredible rise of Google or
The 9/11 attacks, right?
talk about game changers.
Absolutely. Things that no one really saw coming. But then afterward, everyone had a theory.
It's almost like our brains are just wired for stories.
Even if those stories oversimplify things or, well, even mislead us.
We want those neat narratives, so we kind of invent reasons to explain events that might just be totally random.
100%. And that can make us dangerously overconfident. Like we get caught up in those little everyday things, the pennies, as Taleb calls them.
The small, predictable events.
Right. But then we miss the dollars, those black swans lurking in the shadows,
Yeah.
the ones that can really shake things up.
So how do we break free from this trap? Like, how do we even start to pay attention to those dollars without getting dogged down by every little penny?
That's where his concept of mediocristan versus extremistan comes in. Think of them as two different countries of randomness.
Okay, two different countries. I like that.
So in mediocristan, things are pretty predictable.
Driven by averages, right?
Exactly. He gives the example of human height. Like, yeah, there's a range.
But no one's going to be 100 feet tall.
Exactly. It's a world governed by the normal distribution, the bell curve.
Okay, so mediocristans, where things are relatively stable, we can kind of rely on past data and make reasonable predictions.
Right. But then you have extremistan, and in extremistan, extremes rule. Things like book sales, wealth distribution, the impact of new technologies.
So those areas where a single event, a single black swan,
Can completely dominate.
can change everything.
Yeah. The bell curve doesn't apply there. We're dealing with power laws, where just a handful of events have this disproportionately large impact.
It makes you think, like, about your own work or investments. Which country are you playing in?
Right. Are you dealing with relatively predictable events, or are you in a realm where one single black swan could just make or break everything?
Because the strategies for navigating each country, they're vastly different.
For sure. In mediocristan, you can rely on that task data, make your projection.
Feel relatively confident in your predictions.
Yeah. But in extremistan, you need to be much more comfortable with
Uncertainty.
Exactly. You have to accept that you can't predict everything.
And that brings us to another key point.
Yeah.
That problem of silent evidence. Like, we tend to base our understanding of the world on what we see.
Not on what we don't see.
Right. It's like reading only one chapter of a book and thinking you understand the whole story.
Taleb uses that great example of the ship captain who's had a string of successful voyages.
Oh, yeah. And he thinks he's invincible.
But he's just been lucky. He's not factoring in all the captains who sank and, well...
Didn't live to tell the tale.
Exactly. And that's what we call survivorship bias.
Wow. That really hits home. Like, have you ever had that experience?
Mm-hmm.
Where you realize, oh, wow, I'm only seeing a very limited part of the picture.
Oh, all the time. It's a cognitive bias, almost hardwired into our brains. We naturally focus on the winners, the survivors.
And forget about all the failures.
All that silent evidence. And it can completely change your perspective if you factor it in.
It's like we're walking through a forest, and we only see the trees that are still standing. We don't see the ones that have fallen.
And that can lead to all sorts of problems, especially when we're trying to make decisions in a world full of black swans.
Because we might be basing our choices on a very incomplete picture of reality.
Potentially even a misleading picture.
So how do we avoid falling into that trap? How do we become more aware of that silent evidence? The information that's missing from our mental maps.
That's where critical thinking comes in. Challenging your assumptions, seeking out different
Being
perspectives.
willing to consider information that maybe doesn't fit our preconceived notions?
Exactly. It's not always comfortable, but it's essential.
Okay, so we're starting to see how our brains can trick us, how we miss crucial information, how our desire for neat narratives can blind us.
But what about our emotions?
Right. Surely they play a role in how we perceive risk and uncertainty.
Oh, absolutely. Our emotions are powerful, and they can definitely cloud our judgment, especially when it comes to those black swans.
Taleb talks about how a single story, even if it's statistically insignificant, can totally distort our perception of risk.
Oh, yeah, like that example of the mugging in Central Park.
Even though statistically the park is pretty safe,
One story like that can make us feel incredibly vulnerable.
like danger is lurking around every corner.
Right. That emotional response can completely overshadow the statistical reality.
And this is where I think Taleb's preference for experimentation and clinical knowledge over stories and theory really comes in.
Don't just get swept away by a compelling narrative.
Look at the evidence, test those assumptions, and be open to changing your beliefs.
That's the scientific method in a nutshell.
So it's not about ignoring our emotions, but about recognizing how they can sometimes,
Distort our view of the world.
especially when it comes to unpredictable events like black swans.
Exactly. It's about having a more balanced approach, acknowledging the power of emotions.
But also grounding our decisions in evidence.
And critical thinking. Always critical thinking.
This is all starting to make sense. But let's get practical. We've talked about how our brains can trick us, how we can miss information, how our emotions can cloud our judgment. But what about when we turn to experts for guidance?
Us, the expert.
You'd think they'd be the ones to help us navigate a world full of black swans.
Well, that's where you run into what Taleb calls the ludic fallacy. The idea that we can apply the neat, predictable logic of games to the messy, unpredictable reality of life.
Okay, the ludic fallacy. So, tell me more about this. What does that even mean?
Well, he tells this story about two guys, Fat Tony and Dr. John. Imagine you flip a coin and get heads 99 times in a row. What are the odds of getting heads on the 100th flip?
Well, if it's a fair coin, the odds are still 50-50.
Right. That's what Dr. John, the academic, would say. Each flip is independent.
Okay, but I bet Fat Tony has a different take on this.
Oh, absolutely. Fat Tony, the street smart guy, would probably suspect the coin is loaded.
Yeah.
He understands that in the real world, things aren't always as neat and tidy as in textbooks.
Okay, he doesn't mince words.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes you think, how much should we rely on experts, especially in areas prone to black swans?
Right. Because those are the events that defy our models and predictions. And that's the heart of the ludic fallacy. We can get so caught up in these elegant models, these theories, that we forget they're just representations of reality.
Not reality itself.
Exactly. And when we try to apply those models to complex systems like the economy or the stock market,
We're setting ourselves up for some potential surprises.
big time,
So experts can be helpful, but
we need to be aware of their limitations.
especially in those areas where black swans are lurking.
For sure. And it's about being discerning, asking those tough questions, understanding what assumptions they're making,
Recognizing that sometimes the best strategy is just being prepared for the unexpected.
instead of trying to predict the unpredictable.
This has been a really eye-opening start to our deep dive. We've explored how our brains can trick us, how experts can get things wrong, how reality often defies our models and predictions.
It can feel a bit overwhelming.
Right. But before we get too bogged down by all this uncertainty, I think it's time to shift gears. Let's explore how we can actually benefit from this unpredictable world.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it.
Okay, so we just explored how our brains craze those narratives and how sometimes those stories, along with our reliance on experts, can actually blind us to the possibility of those black swans.
Yeah, it can be a bit unsettling when you start to see all the ways we can fool ourselves.
Right. But now I think it's time to shift gears a little.
Hmm.
Let's explore how we can actually benefit from this unpredictable world.
I like that. Turning those lemons into lemonade, right? And that's where Taleb's concept of anti-fragility comes in.
Anti-fragility. Okay, so we're not just talking about resilience, like bouncing back from setbacks.
It's more than that. It's about actually getting stronger from those unpredictable events, those black swans.
Okay, so how does that work? Do we need to become invincible to be anti-fragile? It sounds kind of superhuman.
Haha, not exactly. It's more about recognizing that some systems actually thrive on a bit of disorder. Think about, your immune system.
Oh, okay.
It gets stronger by being exposed to, viruses and bacteria.
Right, so it's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
In a way, yeah. But how do you apply that to, say, your career or investments?
That's what I was thinking. What's the equivalent of like exposing myself to viruses when it comes to my job or my money?
Well, it could be things like embracing small failures. Remember the barbell strategy we talked about?
Yeah, like having a solid base of protection.
Right, to guard against those catastrophic losses, but
Yeah.
then also taking some small calculated risks.
Oh, okay. I see where you're going with this.
Those little risks are like those viruses that give you valuable experience and feedback.
So like having a safety net, but then also being willing to step out of my comfort zone, try new things, even knowing that I might fail,
Exactly. And even if you fail, you learn something from it.
you come back stronger.
Right. And another key aspect of anti-fragility is decentralization.
Decentralization. Okay, so back up a bit. Didn't we talk about how interconnectedness can make systems more vulnerable to black swans?
We did. Think about the 2008 financial crisis. When everything's tightly coupled, one failure can cascade through the whole system.
Like dominoes.
Exactly. But decentralization means having multiple backups.
Okay, backups. So like diversifying my income streams, my skills.
Your knowledge base, even. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Makes sense. So if I'm getting this right, a lot of this boils down to mindset.
Yeah, shifting your perspective on risk and uncertainty.
Instead of fearing the unknown,
See it as a potential source of opportunity.
okay, I like that. Embrace the unknown. But how?
Well, this is where Taleb's distinction between the ludic and the analytic comes in. Remember we talked about the ludic fallacy?
Oh, right, with the coin flips and Fat Tony.
Yeah. So the ludic refers to the world of games.
Where the rules are clear, the risks are calculated.
And the outcomes are, for the most part, predictable.
Like a casino.
Exactly. You might feel like you're in control, but the house always has the edge.
Right. But the real world is a ludic, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
Messy, unpredictable, full of black swans.
So you can't just apply the neat logic of games to those situations.
You gotta think differently.
So what kind of intelligence do you need to navigate that eludic world?
What Taleb calls ecological intelligence. It's about observing, experimenting, and adapting based on feedback from the environment.
So less about predicting the future.
And more about responding to the present.
It's like we need to become more like nature.
Adaptable, resilient, able to thrive in a constantly changing world.
I like that. So
Yeah.
where do experts fit into all of this?
Well, that's where you see the limitations of traditional expertise. They can get stuck in their silos, applying these rigid models and theories.
To situations that might demand more flexibility, more creativity.
Exactly, and I think that's what Taleb was getting at with some of his, well, let's say colorful criticisms of certain experts.
He didn't hold back.
He didn't, but his point is that we need to develop our own bullshit detectors, you know?
Think critically about the information we're getting, not take things at face value.
Especially in areas where those black swans are prevalent.
So, in a way, we need to become our own experts.
And a big part of that is what Taleb calls epistemic humility, recognizing the limits of our own knowledge.
Epistemic humility. Okay, so like admitting that we don't know everything.
And accepting that we're often wrong, even when we're sure we're right.
Oh, that's a tough one.
He has this great thought experiment. He asks people to estimate a range, like the population of a country, and to be 98% sure their range includes the correct answer.
Oh, so like how confident are you in your guess?
Right. And what does he find? People are way too overconfident. They give these narrow ranges, and then they're surprised when the actual answer is way off.
So it's about being more realistic about what we don't know.
And being open to being surprised.
Okay, that's a good one. Stay humble, stay curious. This is great. We've covered so much already. From anti-fragility and decentralization to ecological intelligence and epistemic humility.
A lot to digest.
It is. But I think it's starting to come together.
These are all interconnected pieces of the puzzle, right? It's a framework for dealing with this world that's constantly throwing us curveballs.
Exactly. And I think one of the most important takeaways is this idea of focusing on what you can control,
Because you can't prevent black swans.
but you can control how you respond to them.
That's empowering, right? It's not about eliminating risk, but about managing it.
Being prepared, being flexible,
Having a plan for dealing with the unexpected. Being ready to improvise.
and having that resilience to bounce back.
Love that. It's like turning adversity into an advantage.
It's like a martial art, using the force of the blow against your opponent.
Exactly. Anti-fragility is about using those unexpected events, those black swans, as opportunities.
To learn, to grow, to become stronger.
Embrace the uncertainty as a catalyst for positive change.
This has been incredible. I feel like I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light.
It's powerful stuff.
But what stood out to you? What was the most important idea from the Black Swan?
For me, it's the way Taleb connects all these seemingly different ideas from philosophy and history to psychology and math.
It's a pretty wild ride.
He's not just offering tools, but a whole new way of thinking.
It's a challenge to our assumptions about risk, knowledge, even human nature.
And on that note, I think we're ready to move to our final segment.
Okay, sounds good.
Let's explore some practical ways to apply these ideas.
Everyday life.
Let's do it.
All right, so we've covered a ton of ground in our deep dive into the Black Swan.
We have, from how our brains can trick us,
To how experts can be wrong.
and how reality just loves to throw us those curveballs.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right?
Definitely not.
We also talked about how to become more anti-fragile.
Not just withstand those shocks, but actually get stronger because of them.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Taleb's work so compelling. It's not just theory. It's like a practical philosophy for navigating a world that's...
Well, it's becoming increasingly complex, right?
Yeah.
And unpredictable.
Absolutely. So let's bring it all home. How can we actually apply these ideas to our own lives, our careers, our investments, even our everyday choices?
How do we become more Black Swan savvy?
Yeah. Give us the cheat sheet.
All right. Well, I think one of the most important shifts is to move from prediction to preparation.
Okay, from prediction to preparation. So less about trying to see the future.
Because we've seen how unreliable those forecasts can be, especially in areas where those black swans are lurking.
Right, those areas where the unexpected is, well, expected.
Exactly. So instead of trying to predict everything, we should focus on building robustness and resilience into our lives.
So like always having a plan B or even a plan C.
Exactly. Expecting the unexpected, being ready to adapt.
Okay, I like that. But how do we do that? Like it still feels a bit abstract.
Sure, it depends on your specific situation, of course, but there are some general principles.
Lay it on me.
First, diversify.
Okay, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right. That applies to investments, your skills, your knowledge, even your social network.
The more diverse your portfolio,
The less vulnerable you are to any single event, even a black swan.
okay, spread the risk. Got it. What else?
Second, focus on what you can control.
Oh, right, because you can't control the weather, the stock market.
Global pandemic.
Exactly. But you can control your own actions, your habits, your mindset.
Taking responsibility for your own preparedness instead of relying on outside forces to keep you safe.
Powerful stuff. Okay, what's number 3?
Embrace lifelong learning.
Oh, that's a good one. Always be learning.
Because the world's in constant flux, right? What's valuable today might be obsolete tomorrow.
So true. So be curious, be adaptable, be willing to learn new things.
Update those mental models as you go.
We got to become learning machines.
Uh-huh. I like that. And that ties into the idea of optionality.
Option.
Creating options for yourself, keeping your future open to different possibilities.
So it's not just about having a backup plan, but having multiple paths you can take.
Depending on how things unfold. And that often means taking some small, calculated risks.
Experimenting, even embracing failure as a learning experience.
Remember the story of Appels the painter? Sometimes those breakthroughs come from the most unexpected places.
So to have more control over your future, you actually have to let go of the illusion of control.
Embrace the uncertainty of the present.
That's deep. That's a tough one.
It is. We're so conditioned to seek certainty, to hold on to our plans.
But in a world of black swans,
The only certainty is uncertainty.
okay, I'm starting to get it. It's a mindset shift.
Exactly. Taleb wants us to get comfortable with not knowing, to see the unknown as a source of potential, not a threat.
This has been such an incredible journey. I feel like we've really unpacked some powerful ideas.
The Black Swan is a book that keeps on giving.
Every time you read it, you find something new.
And who knows, you might even encounter a few black swans of your own out there in the world.
The key is to be ready,
Adaptable.
open to the unexpected.
And don't forget that epistemic humility.
Right. Stay humble, folks. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another exploration of, well, the ideas that matter.
Until then, stay curious.
Stay engaged. And most